come to the end of May, and it's time to review the events of the role-playing game sphere. Last month, you all slayed the comments, making it very clear that you are unhappy with Wizards of the Coast. So let's see if the month of May made things any better. WotC started off on a good foot in May with their charitable Misplaced Monsters. D&D's Misplaced Monsters Volume 1 was created in partnership with Extra Life, a fundraising program of the Children's Miracle Network hospitals that helps children receive crucial medical care. This $6 download unlocks 6 misplaced monsters to create and run organized battles for your party. Each monster has a detailed stat block and describes that monster's personality. What's great about these monsters? They were designed by the children who are benefiting from the Children's Miracle Network. Each child got to make up their own monster and their own lore, and it's really cool to see professional artists take these wild ideas from these fantastic kids and turn them into something that you can actually use in your D&D game. Scrapper lives in a junkyard and eats metal. He also uses his wires to grapple victims so he can multi-attack punch their face. Seth, the shape-changing dragon, is my favorite because he looks like my shoulder tattoo. Don't laugh at Coral, the alicorn mermaid hybrid, when hiccups make her shoot bubbles out of her horn, because the bubbles are filled with a variety of magic items, and don't upset her because a flip of her tail can turn you to dust. I have to admit, my heart towards Wizards of the Coast softened just a little bit after seeing these. Last month, several of you said you were really impressed with Shadowdark. In the end of April, beginning of May, brought another indie RPG to Kickstarter. Ben Milton, the creator of Questing Beast channel, and any award-winning author of Maze Rats, The Waking of Willoughby Hall, and Jim Henson's Labyrinth game, gave us the second edition of his Knave RPG. This is not only a rules-light RPG unto itself that you could pick up and play pretty much right away. It's also chock full of random tables and fantastic tools that you can use to build your own campaign setting. So even if you don't actually play Knave, this book is definitely worth the purchase. No matter what brand of fantasy RPG you're playing, Knave's going to help you game master. At time of recording, Knave has made over $600,000. The Kickstarter also allows you to grab 2 adventures for Knave, Summer's End and The Waking of Willoughby Hall. The second of which I ran a couple of years ago for the kids at my wife's school, and they absolutely loved it. I love Ben's Questing Beast channel. It's a great place to get OSR news, and I'm really excited to get my hands on the full copy of Knave 2nd Edition. We talked about Kobold Press's Tales of the Valiant last month. The Kickstarter went live in May and has already reached $800,000 and has 3 more weeks left. So place your bets in the comments. Will Tales of the Valiant raise more money than Shadowdark? I'm excited to see. I personally don't plan to play Tales of the Valiant, but I've always liked Kobold Press's products, and I'm excited to see another competitor enter the ring against WotC. I don't necessarily want to see WotC's downfall, but healthy competition is going to make the RPG space that much better. The biggest buzz in May was Candela Obscura, brought to us by Darrington Press and Critical Role. You can now watch the first episode online and download the new rules. Candela Obscura takes the Illuminated Worlds game system and uses it for a horror genre. But it's very clear that Darrington Press is going to release multiple versions of these Illuminated World rules. We shouldn't be surprised when we see other genres popping up. As much as I love playing and running role-playing games, I don't have the time in my schedule to invest 4 hours a week for 2 years into a Critical Role campaign. And I think there's a lot of other people like me who would be interested in watching the Critical Role players, but don't want that time commitment. Therefore, using the Illuminated World system to run multiple short adventures, they should definitely attract a lot more viewers. Because as I understand it, only about 70% of Critical Role fans actually play Dungeons & Dragons. That means there's 30% of their fan base that can be captured as casual gamers. And as we know, casual gamers can become serious gamers. This would even be a great way to do licensed games. So guess what? You have a new sci-fi movie coming out? You could license your world and your characters to Darrington Press so they could make a game that would release as soon as your movie does. Now, whether you like the Critical Role crew or not, you have to admit that they are exposing many new people to the role-playing game community. And that's a good thing. PaizoCon was also held in May and gave us a good preview of what Pathfinder's 2nd edition Remastered project is going to look like. There will be 4 new hardcover rulebooks. Player Core 1 book and the GM Core book will both release November of this year. The Monster Core book and the Player Core book 2 will release next year. The new rulebooks are compatible with the existing Pathfinder 2nd Edition products, including a comprehensive errata and rules update. The new core books help Paizo transition away from the open game license and puts Pathfinder 2 completely under the Open RPG Creative, aka ORC, license. Paizo has scrubbed Pathfinder 2 of anything that could be directly linked to Dungeons & Dragons. So with necessity being the mother of invention, this creates some interesting choices. Pathfinder's dragons will no longer be divided into the traditional D&D chromatic and metallic dragons. Instead, the new dragons will be connected to Pathfinder's spell-casting traditions, which helps connect the dragons to the lore of Golarion. If you're unfamiliar with the magic traditions of Golarion, Pathfinder 2 doesn't have separate spell lists for wizards, druids, bards, and clerics. Instead, they have arcane, divine, occult, and primal spell lists. So for example, your Pathfinder 2 sorcerer gets to choose one of those 4 spell traditions for their spell casting options. So you can have a more traditional arcane sorcerer, or a divine sorcerer, or a primal sorcerer, or an occult sorcerer. And this is the same thing they're doing with the dragons. So the Monster Core book will have 8 new dragons, 2 from each spellcasting tradition. And these will replace the D&D red, blue, green, white, and black, as well as the gold, silver, copper, bronze, and brass dragons that we're so familiar with. Pathfinder 2 already had an anathema mechanic to make alignment gameable. So again, to get away from D&D's OGL, Pathfinder 2 now does away with alignment and relies on its already existing anathema system, as well as their unholy and holy mechanics. For all those people who didn't like alignment, Pathfinder 2 has finally done away with it. In addition to these changes to alignment, we also get a new type of damage, spirit damage. And spirit damage can either be holy or unholy. I'm assuming this is going to spice up your encounters with incorporeal beings like specters, banshees, wraiths, and ghosts. The Pathfinder Player Core 1 will include 8 ancestries: human, elf, dwarf, halfling, gnome, goblin, orc, and leshy. If you're not familiar with leshies, they're guardians and emissaries of the environment. Leshies are immortal spirits of nature temporarily granted physical form. They're essentially plant people. You'll be able to mix these ancestries with heritage, which include elf heritage and orc heritage. This will allow you to do your half-elf or half-orc, but means you don't have to mix them with human. You can have a human who was raised by orcs, or a goblin who was raised by elves. Core 1 will also include Changeling, which represents a heritage connected to hags, and Nephilim, which will replace Tiefling and Aasimar, because those two are going away with all the OGL stuff. The Core 1 will only include 8 classes: Bard, Cleric, Druid, and Wizard, 1 for each of the spell-casting traditions. And it will also include Fighter, Rogue, Ranger, and Witch. And apparently the Witch is getting a pretty big overhaul. So you might be disappointed if your favorite class is a Sorcerer, Barbarian, or Monk. But those will be in the Player Core 2 book that comes out next year. Another change to distance themselves from the OGL is to do away with the 8 wizard schools. From a world building standpoint, I find that interesting because the new wizard schools will be named after their role in society, like a distinction between battle magic and civic wizardry. The latter of which I assume is the practical magic that would only make sense in a high fantasy setting. The spells that would actually be useful to help a society or a culture sustain itself. And a few other spell effects have been streamlined, like combining light and dancing lights into one new cantrip. Fairy Fire is now called Revealing Light, and Magic Missile is now called Force Barrage. Unfortunately for some, this also means that Pathfinder is doing away with the Drow. The immediate solution to change the existing lore is to say all the history of the Drow was misinformation, and everything you've heard about the Drow in Golarion was just myth and legend, and all the Drow cities are now just ruins to explore. And knowing Paizo and how dedicated they are to their world building, I presume in the future your Pathfinder characters will be able to discover the real calamity that befell the Dark Elves of Golarion. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's a plot for an upcoming adventure path. What are your thoughts? Were the Golarion Drow banished or cursed or betrayed by an evil god? What do you think will be the new lore of the Drow and what made them vanish from existence? Overall, I think these are good changes to the Pathfinder 2 system. Their first goal is to clean up and rebalance a lot of the systems, which should make the game leaner and easier to play. What I find most interesting as they pull away from the Dungeons & Dragons lore, they've had to ask themselves what makes the most sense for our Golarion setting, and how can we draw from real-life folklore to make these monsters truer to the old tales and make them feel less like Gary Gygax's Dungeons & Dragons. So once again, Wizards of the Coast competition only gets stronger. And as I say that, we have to add one more competitor to the list. Gloomhaven. That's right, the famous board game Gloomhaven that's been so popular for the past few years has announced a Gloomhaven role-playing game. If you're unfamiliar with Gloomhaven and its sequel Frosthaven, these are impressively elaborate board games with interesting characters, quality miniatures, and a card mechanic system. Gloomhaven, the RPG, promises to bring all of that back to the table in a way that will allow you to run your own adventures in the Gloomhaven setting. So how does Wizards of the Coast respond to all of this? We already know they have big plans for a bunch of new products. The one that does grab my interest is Phandelver Below, the Shattered Obelisk. So this is a longer campaign that connects to the Lost Mine of Phandelver in the original box set and Dragons of Icespire Peak from the Essentials kit. With so many other great products, I don't know if I'm going to spend money on Wizards of the Coast products. We also know that the Deck of Many Things adventure is coming and a Planescape adventure is coming all this year. And next year, they want us to look forward to a Red Wizards themed adventure and a Vecna themed adventure. But before all of those, we're getting Bigby's Glory of the Giants. And we now know the price point and page count of this new monster book. The selling point is Glory of the Giants is supposed to be a exciting and refreshing new look at the giants of the D&D multiverse. In a similar way that Volo's Guide focused on monsters for low-level gameplay, and Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, of course, focused on dragons. But as they make this product available for pre-order, we find out that all new D&D books are going to cost more. The price point for new WotC books is going from $49.95 to $59.95. That's a 17% increase in cost. Their explanation, of course, is inflation, supply chain issues, and the cost of printing. My thought is, why do you need a 17% increase when inflation has only gone up by 10%? But WotC is trying to soften the blow. Now that WotC owns D&D Beyond, they can give customers what they've wanted, a digital bundle. So for one price, you can get both the book and the digital version. However, that's going to cost $10 more. The bundle will now be $69.95. But if you pre-order it, that brings the price back down to $59.95. So as long as you're pre-ordering, it's kind of like you're not paying extra for the book, You're just paying extra for the digital copy. But don't throw your hands in the air just yet because we're not done. This new book is only 192 pages long, which makes it the shortest of all the monster books. It is shorter than Lolo's Guide and shorter than Fizban's, significantly shorter than the original Monster Manual and the 2 Mordenkainen books. I first heard about this from Mike Shea, the Lazy DM, and that prompted me to do a little bit of digging because Mike pointed out that the Spelljammer box set, even though it was 3 books, only came to a total of 192 pages. So I did a little bit of research and found out that the new Dragonlance book that came out after Spelljammer was 224 pages. So maybe this isn't a trend, it just shows how disappointing Spelljammer was. But with a little more research, I discovered that Eberron and Wildmount were both over 300 pages, and the other setting guides, Ravnica, Theros, and Van Richten's, were all 256 pages, but everything after Van Richten's has only been 224 pages, with Spelljammer being the disappointing 192. This confirms Mike's gut reaction that not only is Wizards of the Coast raising the prices on their books are getting smaller. So if you want to continue playing WotC's version of D&D, you are paying more for less. So we're 1 more month away from the OGL debacle, and WotC continues to appear uninterested in rebuilding its reputation. Oh, wait a second. In between edits, I found new information on Planescape. We now know that Planescape is going to get a 3-box set in the same way Spelljammer did, offering detailed campaign information. Then we'll have Morty's Planar Parade, a 64-page monster manual, and the 3rd book, Turn of the Fortune's Wheel, will be a 96-page adventure. This upsets the downward trend that I was just talking about, as the total package for Planescape will be 256 pages, making it on par with Van Richten's, Theros, and Ravnica. So maybe this means that Wizards of the Coast is not completely trending downward. If anything, this is more evidence that Wizards of the Coast is just not consistent in their content and quality. That's not as bad, I guess. As far as I'm concerned, I love Dungeons & Dragons, but I don't love WotC's version of Dungeons & Dragons. This channel will be dedicated to playing the Dungeons & Dragons that I love, but my definition of Dungeons & Dragons is not beholden to products made by Wizards of the Coast. To me, Dungeons & Dragons is much bigger than WotC, and it includes the OSR and all these other great products. I remain committed to bringing you content that's going to help you run your games, regardless of the company that's making your rulebook. As of May 2023, that's where we stand in the RPG sphere. I'm Brad Wolf, and thanks for watching Dire Den.